Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 521 of 6 Pixels of Separation, the Mirum Podcast. My name is Mitch Joel. It's July the 3rd, 2016. Let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, I'm Jack Myers. I'm publisher of MediaVillage.com and author of The Future of Men, Masculinity in the 21st Century.
I feel like I have a very charmed life, Jack, because you and I connected, I think, almost 7 or 8 years ago. I think it was probably first in our protein forums, as I like to say, at the TED conference. But I knew your work. You were familiar with my work, and I was like all gogging over Media Village and how much I love it. And we sort of had this interesting life where I'm able to watch you go from what I thought was a media advertising guy into very dynamic in different spaces. And I think, as you mentioned, your latest book, The Future of Men, is really a fascinating place. It's a fascinating conversation. And I'm really curious that little part of the journey from media dude to this type of content. What happened in your life? What brought you here?
Well, Mitch, you and I have always had common interests, and I've always enjoyed tracking our careers in parallel. As you know, I've always been passionate about the role of media. My educational background was in something called media ecology, which is really studying the environment of communication and understanding the dynamics and the shifts taking place and how technology is impacting on not only media, but then how in turn it's impacting on culture and vice versa. So as it became clear, about it pretty much went around when we met 7, 8 years ago, the impact of the internet and how it was having a real cultural dynamic, that it would be interesting to look at how that was changing culture, how it was changing community, and how young people who were growing up with the internet would be impacted. So I did a research study, really looking for the pre and the post-internet generations. And instead what I found was this really interesting, passionate and engaged community born pretty much around the time of the internet. Between the internet was the first internet browser, Mosaic, was 1993, as you know. So I looked at the generation born around 91 to 95, 96, and I found they were had a lot of the qualities of the older millennials, the entitled and all the qualities that we've recognized. But I also saw that they were our first prism, our first entry point to looking at the future generation. So I wrote a book about that generation called Hooked Up, A New Generation Surprising Take on Sex, Politics, and Saving the World. And in that generation, I found that girls were emerging much more dominantly. They were more prominent in the workforce. They were more prominent in relationships. They were certainly more prominent educationally, with 60% of that generation's college students being female. And as I was out on my speaking tour for that book, I kept getting the same question: what's happening with the men? What's happening with boys? And I didn't have answers. So I said, well, at least let me have a half dozen answers. And that led me down a rabbit hole that was 4 years of research into men and masculinity, and that has become The Future of Men, which just published recently.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so fascinated with this topic on so many different levels. And I thought I'd sort of share with you some anecdotes of what's happened in my life and the sort of fascination I have with this. Historically, I worked for the Alternative Weekly up here in Montreal, and so I was always in an environment of what I would call more equality, whether it was race, sexual preference, gender. I never really, as a person of my age, had that sort of understanding. And I often tell the story that it was probably, I'm trying to think when it was. I mean, we're talking for sure close to 15, if not 17 years ago. I had worked in a small public relations firm, and the owner was a woman, and it was a small operation, 5 to 10 people. And I remember being at a Chamber of Commerce event, and someone said to me, "Oh, you work at so and such agency?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "What's it like working for a woman?" And I was like immediately taken aback. Like it was like that thing of like gender or even acknowledging
Didn't
it.
occur to you?
No,
Yeah,
never,
yeah.
never.
I
And
had the same. I had the same situation when I joined. When I came to work down in New York. One of my first bosses was a woman named Susan Couch, and then I went to work at CBS, and my boss was a woman named Gail Trell, and again, the same thing. It just didn't occur to me to think twice. In fact, I really enjoyed working for them, and then people would ask me that same question.
it's a strange thing, as if we sort of like we do have these sort of emotions slash titles that we anchor to genders, which I think is normal if you look at the women's movement and how men have sort of had that sort of dominating power thing going on. What in the research, where are you seeing this sort of core of the shift in these gender norms? Like, what's the core of it?
Well, there's three. It's educational, and we can talk about that. It's economic, and it's in relationships. And to make it all three E's, I call it educational, economic, and emotional. And there are certainly aspects in all three of those areas. But what's been really fascinating, just to continue that topic of working for women and the dynamics of women, it's been an interesting reality because with thousands of years of male dominance, there is a reaction to writing about the future of men among a lot of women who say, wait a second, Jack, we've just begun to begin the conversation about women's equalities. In the history of humanity, it's a brand new conversation. So it's not time yet to talk about or be concerned about the realities for men. And my response to that is, you're right, that it is a brand new conversation in the context of the thousands of years of male dominance. But this is the only time in our history ever that we will be going through this period of transformation. Thousands of years of male dominance. We're moving into a period of increasing female dominance that we do see educationally, economically, and in relationships. And if we don't pay attention to the counter of the positive developments for women to the realities and implications for men, then we're going to be leaving men behind for the next hundreds and even thousands of years. That sounds like a grand global concept, but it really is a huge issue that we need to pay attention to men along with the attention we're paying to women, and we're not. We're fundamentally not.
It's a hard topic to have. I mean, even reading the title of the book, and I blurbed the book for you, so I read it before publishing.
And thank you for that.
Not my
by the way.
pleasure. It's a great read. It's strange. Like I'm apprehensive about even us two white males having this conversation.
And that discomfort is at the core. So go to a college campus during orientation week and look at when the freshmen are arriving, and go to the student union and look at the bulletin boards and online at all the organizational support groups that are there. And there are 20, 30 of them, and every group is represented except the group you just described, the white men. Now, you would argue that that's one, the white men have all the institutional support to begin with, and two, white men have had fraternities all their lives. And the analogy I draw to that, white men having and my book is not at all about white men. It's about men, and if anything, I spend a lot of time really focusing on the issues related that the issues are compounded among men of color, among Black and Hispanic communities that require even more attention and concern. But that having been said, at the college campus, the analogy I draw, the metaphor I draw to the fraternity is the old boys network. It's the college version of teaching men all the wrong rules, all the wrong narratives around what it is to be a man today. And fraternities are really under increasing pressure to recognize that the gender, not only are gender norms changing, but men are changing. And young men coming to college do not need to be taught how to go through a hell week to be a real man. Just like when a young man joins a corporation or an organization, they don't need to be embraced and brought into the old boys network to succeed.
So, well, with that, though, the understanding is that there's no need to advocate for it because it comes from a place of privilege, is my assumption, and that what we're trying to do is serve those who don't have a voice, the underprivileged, and that it still is this quote-unquote male-dominated world, and that's the core, right? So if you start talking about the future of men, that's sort of even where my own personal discomfort comes in, because it's like, oh, well, what do we need to worry about that for?
What do we need to? Well, and you know, I don't worry, I'm not concerned about men over 30. I think certainly from a relationship point of view, there are concerns. For example, 85% of heterosexual long-term relationships that end are ended by the woman. 85% of relationships ended by the woman. There's 3 times as many unmarried middle-aged women today as there were a few decades ago. These are concerns, and women are finding it more and more difficult to find men who are their educational equal. And that's a concern because there are fewer well-educated men entering the adult years and relationships and the workforce. That has impact economically. And I'd love to drill down a little more deeply in that. But again, going back to your primary point in terms of, you know, men have been the privileged gender and for the most part continue to be the privileged gender. But if we fail to focus on young men coming out of college and in their college years, in high school, who are 50% more likely to fail math, science, and reading in high school, who are far more likely to drop out of high school, far less likely to go to college, far more likely to drop out of college if they go. If we fail to recognize and focus on these realities that are in many ways gender-based, then we're going to be continuing to create what I consider to be a lean-out generation of men who are failing to support their families, failing to hold on to meaningful jobs and move into relevant careers, and are becoming increasingly angry at the women's movement itself and failing to support it. And we're seeing that in politics in the United States today and in many places around the world as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to go down that road. But before that, so is part of the dominance of masculinity from the strength and physicalness of it? And obviously on the female side was the nurturing mother component of it, and that we've evolved from a world of wherever we were into the industrial age, which was still a very sort of physical type of work, into this knowledge economy. And the knowledge economy substantially equalizes as well.
Yeah, and manufacturing jobs, which just a couple of decades ago were 25% of jobs, are less than 10% of jobs today. So yeah, Mitch, we go back to the caveman and, you know, the old hunter-gatherer and the man being the provider, needing the physical strength while the woman is nurturing and in the home. but when did it become an either or? And when did it become that a man who showed female qualities was weak, wasn't a real man, was told to man up? And when did it become that a woman who showed qualities of strength and assertiveness and forcefulness in a business were somehow not feminine? And there's a great line in the movie The Intern when Anne Hathaway says, when did it happen that girls became women and men became boys? And I think we're seeing that redefinition today, where women are exhibiting more traditionally male qualities and succeeding more with the combination of male and female qualities. And young men are exhibiting more traditionally female qualities. Young men are more vulnerable. They are more emotionally open. They are more sensitive. They are more willing to show their emotions publicly. And frankly, young men today are not only open to gender equality and new gender norms, they're not even learning the old, outdated gender norms. They're growing up with a completely different set of realities in their lives, where boys and girls are equal. They're equal in school, they're equal in sports, and they're equal online.
So is that the thing, that if we sort of go down that road and go, and that's how it should be, I believe, obviously, that we have an equality, that we have a breaking down of these ideologies, that boys versus girls, that we sort of break through the norms because everybody will develop and grow and learn at their own age, pace, whatever it might be, that when you move down that road, why do we have to question then the way it was? And again, we have people who are doing their own gender assignment based off of what's happening inside, how they feel, how their chemistry is, regardless of what might be perceived as the physicality of it as well. It seems to me like we're going down the right path, and why should we then stop and go, well, let's stop and talk more about men versus women, versus actually maybe we're heading down the path where we don't have to even have those conversations, which again intuitively makes more sense to me.
You're exactly right, and that would be the ideal. The ideal would be that we're going down this path toward greater gender equality, toward balanced gender norms. But the unfortunate reality is that there is a growing imbalance that is now favoring women and working to the detriment of men. And that imbalance will become more and more pronounced and more problematic to society. Just some examples, I've mentioned some educationally, economically. Unmarried women under 30, for example, are out-earning young men by a national average in the United States of about 8%. I believe that holds true in most of in all of North America. In major cities, it's as much as 20%. That young women are out earning younger men. Now, we'd say in the past, well, when they get married and have kids, that'll change. But it's not changing. We're seeing couples getting married now in their late 20s to mid-30s. They're having children later. And by that age, the women and their careers are established. In many instances, they are out earning their men. In many instances, they're more educated than men and therefore more likely to get higher paying jobs. So the women statistically are staying in their careers longer and are continuing to out earn the men. So you have this shifting dynamic where married two-parent households with children, women are out earning the men in more than 50% of the cases, and that dynamic is growing. So all the traditional norms that we'd say, well, balance is, we're getting balanced. We're increasingly moving toward a society that is less balanced. And my real concern, all of this is fine. I think it's fine to have more stay-at-home dads. It's fine, but society is not embracing the stay-at-home dad. The stay-at-home dad, 15 years ago we called the stay-at-home dad the out-of-work dad. We didn't even have the phrase hardly stay-at-home dad. Today, unfortunately, we still call them the out-of-work dad. They're not recognized and rewarded by society. They're embarrassed, they're humiliated often, and feeling uncomfortable in their roles. We're seeing a society in which the men are becoming increasingly unable to find the good jobs. 2/3 of all new jobs created require a college education. Men's income since 1980 has grown 1%. Women's income has grown 26%.
But wasn't that because of the inequity?
Well, you can argue that the 26% is the inequity, but the 1% growth in men's income since 1980 is essentially men let fewer manufacturing jobs available and fewer higher paying jobs available. And also it's due to a real support initiative to move women into the STEM categories, the science and math categories, without an equivalent effort to encourage men to go into what's known as the HEAL categories, the health, education, administrative, and literacy roles. And in many instances, that's still an embarrassing place for a man to be working. A male nurse walks in, and they get the same kind of reaction that a female pilot used to get.
So I'm fascinated with this because if you were to just stop this conversation and you and I were to just go off and have lunch on our own and you were to sit down with somebody and say, so where do you think we're at in terms of women's rights, in terms of women getting equal pay, in terms of women holding senior leadership roles within organizations, in terms of Sheryl Sandberg and the lean in, it feels like we're doing better, but not even close. And what you're saying is there a disparity in that? Is that a false statement?
No, that's an accurate statement. We're not even close. There's a long way to go. We cannot take our eye off the ball with women's rights and pay equality. All I'm asking for is a commensurate understanding of and awareness of the realities and implications for men, and that we begin to equalize in the support being given to men as we've been giving support for the last 60, 70 years of the women's movement to women in helping them make this transformation and this shift. Every corporation, every organization has a women's group, a mentoring group to help women as they enter the workforce and as they deal with realities like returning to work after having a baby or making the decision whether to stay at home or go back to work after having a baby, to as they get promotions to help them climb the corporate ladder. And there are both men's initiatives and women's initiatives to help women improve their careers and enhance their opportunities. We don't have any of those similar support initiatives for men.
But do we need them, Jack?
We do need them. Young men are coming into an organization, often into corporations and organizations. They've grown up, 40% of children are growing up in fatherless homes. They've gone to school where the teachers have been primarily women. They've gone through school and through their childhood and online where women are equals and in many instances dominating. They're comfortable with that. They're comfortable with themselves. And then they come into a corporate environment where they're being given a completely different set of norms that are still these old, outdated, old boys network gender norms for boys. And there's absolutely no support as they see women advancing, as they come into an organization where women are 60 to 70% of the employees, as they are in 13 of the 15 growth industries. They're seeing women getting all the support, and there's no support for them. We're assuming that because they're men, that they should just man up and deal with it and get along with it, and that all the rules were built for them initially, and no one's recognizing that all of those rules have changed and collapsed around them. And they're looking around saying, I'm confused, I'm conflicted, I don't know where to turn. I'm not in a healthy relationship. I'm struggling in my job. Where do I turn to? I go to the human resources department, and it's like there's no institutional support for them there. They look around for clubs and organizations. They're all for women, and the men's organizations are more often than not angry men that are unhealthy and destructive. So where do they turn? They don't have any place to turn, and that's my concern, and that's really what I wanted to focus on in the future of men, is to say we need to focus and pay attention and help recognize that these men are looking to us for support. I draw a great analogy, if I can riff a bit,
Please.
Mitch.
Yeah, please.
The way I look at it, we've got a society in which men are moving from the driver's seat into the passenger seat. And when they were driving, even if they didn't have the directions, they were in control. They were behind the driver's wheel, the steering wheel, so they didn't have to ask. And, we all joke about how men don't ask for directions, and it's true. Now there's GPS, but there's no GPS for relationships. There's no GPS for career support, and there's no GPS for family support. And they're not in control anymore, and they're confused, they're conflicted, they don't know which way to turn, and they're not asking for help. They're not asking for directions, and there's no guides there to help them. So the questions I ask and the answers I try to provide in the book are, what are some of those solutions? How can we be more supportive of this new reality? And number one is just calling attention to it and helping men understand they're not alone.
Have you seen examples where a business and organization has sort of been self-aware of this and has done stuff to advance this cause? Because, again, when I think about it, I'm like, well, if you're anybody, male or female, you can go see a therapist, you can go see a job counselor, you can go speak to a peer. There are mentors to speak to, versus, again, underprivileged or groups that don't feel they have that, and that's why they create that infrastructure. I almost feel like, well, men don't do that or don't have that support group because it's sort of innate. They have peers, they have, and I guess it's not perfect.
That's a big jump. It's a big assumption, Mitch, and because, first of all, therapists, others, that assumes the economic ability to afford that. And in terms of peer groups, yes, for women, there's, again, the 60-year history of the women's movement creating peer groups, support groups. Men have had the Old Boys Network to support them. Young men coming in don't have those peer groups. They have each other to turn to, but they don't have men our age, and men over 30 have grown up in a very different world with a very different set of expectations, a very different set of support infrastructure, and they're not capable or competent to help serve and support young men, because they're more than likely than not to give them the wrong message about how to respond and how to act. And they, frankly, a lot of men, even 30 and above, don't really understand the younger men who are coming out of college now, or coming into their careers, or coming into jobs, and coming into relationships. A lot of men can't relate to the idea of a guy being a stay-at-home dad. We can empathize, we can support, we can sympathize, even though that's probably all the wrong emotions to have toward them, but we can't, and we can't relate. And we certainly aren't in a position to support them by understanding what they're dealing with or going through. So the only place men have to turn in a lot of instances is women. And what I'm encouraging is that every organization, every corporation that has a support mentoring group for their young female employees who are coming in, and members, organizational members who are coming in, practice true gender equality and engage men in that process as well, the young men in that process. And let's form organization and groups within corporations that are focusing on helping the more established, more senior men understand the younger men who are coming in, and bring therapists and guides in to help older men understand the younger men, the new generations of men. And in many instances, again, that's going to be the women. We need to be our GPS, our guides.
Or a world where the women, like, why can't we live in a world where the women can guide the men?
Absolutely. Yep. I think they should.
So I'm fascinated with this because, again, I feel like when you talk about this and you write about this and you're doing interviews about this now, you're having conversations like we're having now, do you worry in terms of how the message is being brought across, that is there a political incorrectness to it, or do you feel that there's actually a political correctness to it that we're just not acknowledging?
Both. Both.
No, it's because, again, I want to keep reiterating, it's a tough subject.
I'm trying to be very sensitive. I do,
because we're also making generalities across genders, which is silly too, right? When I think of like a stay-at-home dad, in my brain, I'm like, that person has that instinct or that desire to do that job. Good for them. Same as when I look at someone who takes on a career in politics, where I'm like, why would you ever do that? Like, I almost have the same framework in my life where it's just like, may not be for me, but good on you. I think we need more people like that.
There's been a few different reactions as I've been out talking about the future of men. Women, I'd say most women have been very positive. They've been very engaged, interested, curious. Many women have shared stories with me that relate to their concerns about men, both the old definitions of and outdated models that still exist so much in society, and I have several of those stories in the book, but also their awareness and understanding of the shifts taking place, and their desire to support those shifts. There have been many women who have been angry at me for writing this book and for focusing on men. We're so early in the advances, and we've still got so far to go. It's not yet time to be concerned among men. The most surprising reaction I'm getting is from men. 70 to 80% of the men who I tell I've written a book about the future of men respond by saying, "You mean we have a future?" And there's a glibness and a sardonic attitude in their voice. It's like, yeah, we know the world is changing. Women are taking over, but then do they recognize that there's a need for them to really embrace younger men and support younger men? Do they actually care? No. It's like most men are responding by saying, yeah, but it doesn't affect me. I'm still in control of my world. I'm still master of my domain. I don't have to worry. And the point I make to them is, actually, you do need to be concerned. You need to be concerned about your sons, your grandsons, and your daughters and your granddaughters who will not have healthy, supportive men growing up and around them and with them, and healthy relationships. And we're already seeing that destructiveness in relationships today. And we're seeing a political backlash that is embracing a lot of these angry young men, both on, in the United States on the Bernie Sanders side as well as on the Donald Trump side.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I definitely, it's a hot, contentious issue from the get-go, but it does potentially look like the lineup will be male versus female. Donald Trump versus a Hillary Clinton. I think gender, being Canadian, I get to say this because I get to sit on the sofa with my popcorn, not have the noose around my neck like everyone else will down there.
No, Donald Trump will be taking over Canada if he becomes president.
Right.
He'll be sending forces in.
Well, we'll build a wall and we'll make you pay for it. So it'll be pretty easy to take care of that. I mean, we have the solution from. So gender is going to play a huge factor in this. And also, if you look historically at those two characters, with gender closely comes sexuality, and the emotional side of it too. what are your thoughts based off of the work that you're doing and how
Well,
it's
yeah, Bernie Sanders has done a very good job of being a catalyst for getting young people and especially young men into politics. Um, we did a study among young people 18 to 26 years old, all college educated, all voters or prospective voters, and by far they support Bernie Sanders. The girls more than the boys, but the they and the are least likely to vote for Donald Trump. Although among young men, the second candidate they're least likely to vote for is Hillary Clinton. The young men are focused almost exclusively on issues related to jobs, career opportunities, career training, and less expensive college education and debt relief for college loans. The young women are focused on those issues, but also more importantly and more predominantly, they're focused on women's pay equality, women's rights, LGBT rights, the environment. Women have a number of issues that they're voting on, whereas men are solely focused on jobs and college and education. So Hillary's going to have some challenges getting the young men back and engaged. And if her competition, and it looks like it will be either Trump or Cruz, and most likely Trump, really double down on jobs in job opportunities. It's going to be a tough battle for the hearts and minds of the young men who will set aside their partisan beliefs and issues to vote for the candidate who will be most likely to get them a job.
I want to transition to a sort of another thought before we wrap up. So I took you to an earlier story where I had worked for a woman and I had that question being a younger person and was very taken aback by it based off of where I am. And I want to fast forward to much more recently where I was asked to sit on the board of directors of a large public company, and in doing my due diligence, I sat down with a very well and recognized university or college professor who had a lot of experience at a very senior business level dealing with public companies and CEOs and things like that, and it was adjunct to a very well-known course that actually trains directors for these types of positions. And I met them for a coffee at Starbucks, and we were just chatting, and he had no idea where I was going with the conversation. I said, I've been asked to sit on this public board. He said, which one? Told him, and I said, wow, that's really, really, really interesting, and I would go for it. And I didn't really give any context, and I said, well, you sort of jumped on that a little too fast for someone who's academic. What's going on? He said, listen, we put through thousands of people through this director training course, and a lot of them are, to be honest, males, white males even, and those people are not getting those jobs anymore. He said they're going primarily to women. There's less and less. So just the board of directors are getting smaller and smaller. They're getting more strategic. So that's one side to it. But he said the dominating side is just statistically these are going to women, and if they're going to men, they're going to men who have a more visible diversity than I would have. I guess just being polite to my whiteness. And it's funny, again, in my brain, I would never have made that assumption. And I guess you and I have seen this over the years on the speaking side where, I'm often the one who's pulled aside and said, we need more women on the panel, or we need a women keynote speaker. And I'm always the one who's racking my brain and trying in the organizational side to help and make sure that there's that diversity everywhere. It's what you want. But still we see, there's even a massive popular Tumblr called, all white male panel, where it's just every picture from every conference of it just being male after male. And again,
middle-aged white men gone crazy on, that's what we see.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because there's a side of me that agrees that there needs to be a sort of like we need to accept the emerging diversity of both gender and race 1,000,000%. I live and breathe that every day. And then the other side is, of course, you don't want to lose a job because you were the best person for the job but didn't happen to have the right gender or racial profile. And
there's a couple reasons why we're seeing that shift. One is just the reality of the male dominance on the boards, but also there's been an amazing amount of research, especially in Europe, that shows that corporate boards with three or more women are significantly outperforming corporations with 0 to 1 female members of the board. So there's an economic reason why boards are embracing women, not just a social and gender reason.
But then I lose the job.
Yep, that's exactly right. And, and most women and I would say, well, tough luck. That's the way the world ran in the opposite direction for, hundreds and even thousands of years. So that's the reality that we're facing. And in the old-fashioned, completely inappropriate and completely politically incorrect context, man up, Mitch.
I can't think of a more appropriate place to end, Jack. I want to thank you so much for your time. It's such an amazing conversation piece, and I want people to pick up the book, The Future of Men, also because there's a ton of stuff in there in terms of marketing, advertising, communications, and structures, which we didn't even get a chance to get into, but maybe, Jack, you'll be kind enough to come back and we can focus literally on that aspect of it, because that whole part was just fascinating as a marketing professional for me as well. Let people know where they can best connect to you and all your work.
Yeah, and the media and advertising and marketing story is a critically important one. I'd love to do another I'd love to connect with you again, talk about that. Sure. JackMyers.com, MYERS, is where you can find out more about the book. MediaVillage.com is our website for our business. And the book's available at all the websites, Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble. But I really urge people to go into their independent bookstore and ask for it.
Yeah, and FutureOfMen.com is also yours.
FutureOfMen.com, and yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Jack.
Thank you. It's been great, Mitch. I really enjoyed it.